Pharma team, and for the next 25 minutes or so, we will be speaking with Revance, and we're very pleased to have CEO Mark Foley and CFO Toby Schilke joining us, and lots to talk about. So we're just going to dive right in, if that's okay, Mark. And maybe I'll start things off at a high level. So you're launching a facial injectable product line, perhaps two, with Daxi coming in the not too distant future. But you're doing this amid a pandemic. So with that in mind, let's take a step back and just talk about the space and specifically the pace of filler and neuromodulator procedures these days, and how that compares to what we were seeing pre-pandemic. So I think that would be a good way to sort of set the stage, and then we can go right into specifics on RHA and Daxi.
Sounds good. Well, again, thanks for having us today, David. So in terms of the overall market, again, we're not the only ones in the space who have provided commentary. So consistent with what others have reported, we saw a meaningful slowdown in the April-May timeframe, kind of in March as well, with a pretty healthy rebound in the facial injectable category as you move through summer and certainly into Q3. We've seen, based on our HintMD platform, kind of transaction volumes returning to pre-COVID levels. And I would argue even in plastic surgery, we've seen some cases where volumes have exceeded normal pre-COVID levels, partly because I think that people are home, they've got time, and so they're taking advantage of that to have different types of procedures. So we've been really encouraged by what we've seen despite the pandemic. Now, obviously, with some of the surging levels, we'll have to see whether or not we see another step back. But we're in the market with two products, the fillers, as you mentioned, the RHA line of fillers, and then the HintMD platform, which I think in some ways is actually a really good additional service offering for us to have, because you can do remote checkouts, contactless payments. And so it's yet another sort of offering that we can provide these practices in this COVID environment.
Okay. And with the surging case burden, and you alluded to it, I mean, are you seeing in the here and now more disruptions to practices? What are you hearing anecdotally out there regarding facial injectable procedures these days?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's sort of real time changing. We're out here in California where we've seen, for example, Santa Clara County just went to more strict guidelines. So I think it really is area by area. Up through, kind of the Thanksgiving break, we were seeing this kind of return to pre-COVID levels. And I think too that a lot of these practices have figured out how to operate now in the COVID environment, with distancing protocols, cleaning protocols, requiring certain testing. So I think that overall, aesthetic practices have become much better in sort of navigating and working in this environment, understanding that they need to figure out how to treat patients that want to come in. So up through this phase, it's been pretty much a return to normal. There was definitely in the early part, I think, pent up demand. And there was a question of, is this pent up demand going to continue to, work its way through, or we sort of work through the backlog? But in any event, I think we've seen pretty healthy volumes. I think going forward from Thanksgiving, there's a little bit of a question out there. Are we going to see in different geographies some rolling back? And if we do, will that have any impact on cases? And I think that's a bit of a TBD, but thus far, we've been really, I think, encouraged by the resiliency of the facial injectable market.
And I guess to be clear, though, if you did start to see a backlog develop with visibility into mass vaccinations, that would be something that you would expect to clear at some point in 2021, perhaps sooner rather than later. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that these practices will figure out ways to start chipping away at that backlog that exists. And now, I think for a little while, there was a bit of a pinch point because of social distancing and cleaning protocols, where there was a little bit of a constraint in terms of how many patients they could see in a given day. What we did start to see is some patients getting more treatments in a single visit. So maybe the dollars per patient was going up. But I would expect if we don't see a huge change in procedure volume, then I think we'll continue to see a really nice return to normalcy as we move into next year because of the vaccine and light at the end of the tunnel, as we were talking about. If there is some additional restrictions, I think you'll see that pent-up demand grow. And as we kind of come into next year, that group will start to work its way through the system.
Got it. So let's talk about RHA, which launched pretty recently. I wanted to get your thoughts on some metrics here. Number of doctors you're targeting, number of doctors you've trained to date, and how we should think about your target audience and direct-to-consumer activities, particularly as we move into 2021.
Yeah, so first off, in terms of, kind of the metrics, we just launched in September, so we really only have one quarter, and we're certainly open to giving more details as we get more into the launch. We want to make sure that the data that we're giving, A, is meaningful and is going to be a representative trend going forward. And two, we do want to be a little sensitive from a competitive standpoint because there's not really good information out there with our peers on the filler market. And so while we want to give investors information that helps inform how they think about the business, we are going to want to be thoughtful. What we have said thus far is that we've trained about 600 injectors through the end of Q3. The revenue that we generated of roughly $3 million, $2.8 million of RHA filler revenue, and $200,000 in HintMD revenue was made up of less than 500 accounts. And so we're in the very early stages, and what we want to see are kind of what's the reorder rate cycle going to be? How do we think about it? We're going at it with a very sort of targeted approach. So your question, how do we think about our accessing of the market? First and foremost, we're creating a new prestige category, which means that we're not interested in selling to everybody. We want to sell to injectors that value a premium product offering. And what that's going to mean, if you look at the kind of 30 to 40,000 accounts that do facial injectables, we're going to be targeting a subset of that, primarily focused on dermatologists and plastic surgeons from a credibility and a premium focus. And so that's where our focus will be. And so if you look at the launch strategy that we took with the RHA fillers, in the kind of late Q2, we put it in the hands of a select few to give us feedback because this is the first time it's ever been in the US. Then we went to this sort of 100 physician preview launch where we gave them product. They treated about 1,000 patients, so roughly 10 patients per user to get experience, and then we rolled it from there. So we're trying to intentionally be very targeted and focused, which frankly in this pandemic period, I think frankly it helps us because we aren't trying to be everything to everybody. We're trying to focus on those accounts where they value this type of thing. And I think that's the same thing that we plan to do for the neuromodulator. And I know we'll talk more about that later, but it's that same sort of measured approach. So I think you should expect us as we go into 2021. We're going to continue to be disciplined. We're going to, continue to really go after sort of the higher end of the market in terms of those that focus on the prestige experience. And that's how we plan to roll it out.
Got it. So amid the pandemic, can you talk about the extent to which your sales reps are in the field? Obviously, you've trained doctors, so clearly some of the reps are in the field, but maybe talk about the mix between in-person versus virtual support of accounts and how you're able to navigate that amid the pandemic.
So again, it's going to be geographically dependent, right? In terms of what does the local area, what are they comfortable with, or frankly, the local practice. In most cases, we're able to have in-person visits. Now, those might be followed up with a Zoom call or some other remote engagement, but most are in-person engagements. And again, I think a lot of practices have figured out now how they're going to regulate engagement with vendors and patients and everything else. We've obviously developed a very robust set of digital tools to supplement what we're able to do in person. So, online training modules, Zoom engagements, and we've armed our sales force on that side of it. So we continue to feel really good that the accounts that we're targeting, we're able to either meet them physically in person or serve up either through a Zoom call or digital tools, the information that they need and that their practice needs to successfully onboard the product. So, I think frankly, these tools will continue to survive post sort of the pandemic once, we get the vaccine out there. I think it's led to some efficiencies that I don't think we fully appreciated when we started.
Sure. And I wanted to switch gears a little bit and just talk about your marketing message to practices. And then what I mean here is, maybe talk about how you're positioning the fillers relative to the market leaders like the Juvederm collection, the Restylane franchise, how we should think about that.
So I think to answer that, let me go back and talk about the evolution of hyaluronic acid fillers. If you look at, the core Restylane, Juvederm, those products were, originally developed in the early 2000s. And Valerie Toupin, who's the founder and CEO of Teoxane, the makers of the